Hello, welcome to the presentation on life history. This presentation fits into our section of the course called the adaptive complex because we're thinking about human adaptations and human behavior not in the context of the immediate moment and how they might increase your reproductive success in this moment, but how they might fit into increasing reproductive success in concert with all of your other actions across your lifetime. And in this sense, we need to start thinking about humans as life cycles. So you were once a zygote, then an infant, a child, a juvenile. Now you're most likely an adult. Someday you will grow old and die. All of your actions, of course, all of your lifespan will affect your total lifetime reproductive success. How long you were a child, how early did you start reproducing, what did you do as an adult? How long did you live for? What did you do as an old person? Did you help your kin out? All of these things comprise what makes your reproductive success over the course of a lifespan. And that's why we need to study life history theory. Life history theory was developed to explain variations in life cycles among living things. And this includes the timing of various events in a lifespan, how long the lifespan is, and what individuals are doing at different stages. So we can apply this to humans, because humans are animals with life cycles, and we can examine how we might spend limited time and resources over the course of a life cycle to maximize reproductive success. So here are some examples of different life cycles. We have hunter-gatherers along the top. We have rural pre-modern agriculturalists in the middle, and along the bottom we have modern urban life cycle. So this would be most likely something similar to what you have experienced or have seen close kin and friends experience. And so we can see that there's some variation. First of all, age at menarche, M stands for menarche, varies between these different populations, even though age at first birth also varies. So in the hunter-gatherer populations that were measured, menarche was usually around the age of 15 and first birth roughly around the age of 20. And this spread gets wider among agriculturalists and then modern urban populations. Some of the timing of these events we have more conscious choice over than others. Age at menarche is based on body fat percentage. So you don't start menstruating until you've acquired enough body fat to sustain a pregnancy. And since modern and pre-modern agricultural populations tend to be, in some cases, hyper-nourished, menarche generally occurs at earlier ages. Something like age at first birth can be controlled either by not having sex or having sex and using contraceptives, so there's a bit more of a conscious choice over the timing of this event. Now, we've already talked about some of the trade-offs that people are making when they make choices over the course of the life cycle. Choices about how many kids to have. Are there enough resources to support enough children? Choices about quantity versus quality, for example. And we have already discussed a lot of these life history decisions and how to allocate limited time and resources. And we discussed several layers of choices. You can invest in self or reproduction, and sometimes the investment in self pays you back in greater reproductive effort later down the road. And once you choose reproduction, you can have a choice between parenting and mating, and within parenting there are several choices like offspring quality versus quantity. And remember, time and resources are limited for parents. Resources like water, space, and time. Starting early is a good bet to increase your reproductive success, but ultimately we will all die, and so we're all restricted in terms of the time and number of kids we can have. And parents are strategic, and we expect behaviors to maximize reproductive success by allocating limited time and resources to offspring. And remember, this is over the total lifetime survival and reproduction. So this was all review, and we also talked about some life history trade-offs that individuals face. So in self versus reproduction, we saw the male blue-headed wrasses who spend more time in reproductive activity had a slower growth rate, so they could invest in growing or they could invest in reproduction. Sometimes it pays off to invest in reproduction, sometimes it pays off to invest in growing. These trade-offs are dependent on local ecologies. Oh, There we go. Investing in mating and versus parenting. We've got here women per man in camp, and investment in nurturing. As the women per man increases, the men spend less time nurturing. And the other graph that appeared was for current versus future offspring, and this was infanticide rates in Toronto. And you'll remember that as mothers' age increases, the likelihood of infanticide decreases, because as women reach or near the end of their reproductive career, they've got less future to think about, and they're more likely to invest in current offspring. And finally, we talked about quantity versus quality. The fewer offspring you have, the more you can invest in each one. Now again, it's a trade-off, whether you need to invest in competitive, high-quality offspring, or whether you prefer to invest in a shotgun approach with higher quantity. Varies by species and varies within species as well, depending on local ecologies. So human life history is actually quite unique. 3 major trends. First of all, our children are dependent on others for subsistence much longer than any other mammal. And yet we wean babies earlier than most. So we have a longer period of dependence, even though not very long is actually nursing. Most of the dependence is for food from relatives. Our age at first reproduction is also much older than that of other mammals, but our fertility can be higher. Usually starting sooner means that you can have more babies in your lifespan, but what we do is we start reproducing later and then reproduce much more quickly, even with our highly dependent young. And we have the longest lifespan of any terrestrial mammal, yet women stop bearing almost at the middle of it, and generally have about, if they live to old age, 30 years. Following the cessation of reproduction. This is quite unique as well. So let's go through and talk about some of these. Why wean earlier? Well, we've discussed the fact that we can afford to have multiple dependent offspring because we have alloparents who help care for children. This is a picture of me taking my nephew to the park one day. So by having kin around to help raise your offspring. Now, one of the proximate mechanisms that allows humans to have dependent weaned offspring is through the cessation of lactation. So when a mother is nursing, her body is receiving signals that she's currently investing in an infant, and that suppresses ovulation and suppresses pregnancy. When lactation ceases or becomes infrequent, then ovulation occurs again. So having other individuals around to help care for your children, who are babysitting your children, who are taking care of them, you are not you have the option not to continue nursing, and also the infant might not be around for you to nurse, and so because you can suppress your ovulation through lactation, you can have another offspring. So why be dependent longer? Well, among all mammals, lower adult mortality directly correlates with longer juvenile dependence. So the less likely you are to die as an adult, the longer the juvenile period of dependence is for most species. Why would this be the case? Well, the less chance you have of dying as an adult means that it's a safer bet to invest in yourself, or as an individual making these life cycle decisions or under the influence of the consequences of these life cycle decisions, or you can invest in your offspring more because it's a safer bet that your offspring will live to adulthood and live through adulthood. So lower adult mortality among humans correlates with our longer juvenile dependency. Why start later? Well, this goes back to the trade-off of investment in self versus investment in reproduction. We are the only primate with a childhood, and what a childhood gives us is time to learn culture, and there's a lot to learn. And we're going to talk about all the adaptive properties of having culture next week. So by spending a longer time as a juvenile, you're investing in yourself, and you're actually increasing your reproductive opportunities or potential in the future because you have this adaptive cultural complex that allows you to have multiple dependent offspring, feeding more offspring at one time because Your cultural abilities allow you to collect more food, for example. Why have shorter interbirth intervals? Well, we start later, and our reproductive success is higher because we have kids closer together. This is only possible with help from the alloparents, and this is what all of Sarah Hrdy's book is about, in fact. We can have multiple dependent offspring because we have all of these alloparents. So let's look at who helps. Mostly it's limited to 3 categories: fathers, juveniles, and female kin. What do fathers get out of it? Reproductive success, as long as there's a fair amount of paternity certainty. What do juveniles get out of it? There's a lot of practice, babysitting. What do female kin get out of helping? Is inclusive fitness. And so this is the percentage of an individual holding a baby during the day for a tribe called the Yukwana. They're in the Amazon, kind of seeing ecology as the Yanomamo. So mother spends most of the day holding the baby. Sister, female, cousin, and aunt and grandmother also spend a lot of the day holding the baby. Now, one remark when I show these figures is usually that, well, fathers care in a different way. They may not be holding the baby, but they might be off hunting, and that's definitely true. There's many ways of caring. This is just one measure. Another way of caring is foraging time. And this data comes from the Hadza, who are foragers in Kenya. And this is the percent, the minutes of foraging time on an average day during the wet season and the dry season among 3 categories: the lazy, unmarried girls, the hardworking but very busy mothers, and the hardworking grandmothers. And so grandmothers actually spend a lot more time foraging than mothers or unmarried girls, and they're producing a lot of extra calories, and a lot of these calories are going towards female kin. So grandmothers actually help a substantial amount. And this leads us to the question of why grandmother? Why would grandmothers cease reproduction earlier? So around the age of 50, cross-culturally, we have a very long post-reproductive period. You can see here, comparing humans to chimpanzees, we have a much longer post-reproductive period. So why bother having this period? Why not continue reproducing? Several hypotheses have been proposed, and these are all important aspects to consider, and many of them are complementary to one another. So one thing that occurs is osteoporosis in old age, and osteoporosis can cause complications during birth. Also, as sperm and eggs age, there's more likely to be birth defects among infants. So women might be giving up low-quality offspring or high chance of dying in order to help out their daughters who are younger. Another hypothesis is that individuals must outlive their last offspring by at least 10 years in humans. So you want to be able to see that last baby off into independence. Chimpanzees, we see a 6-year post-reproductive period. That's about the time of juvenile dependence of chimpanzee offspring. Humans were living considerably longer than 10 years, but it does make sense to outlive your last baby so you can see it to independence. And finally, maybe, as I said previously, it's to help your daughters reproduce. And why daughters and why grandmothers in particular? Well, it goes back to this idea of maternity certainty and paternity certainty. Grandmothers know who their children are. They have 100% certainty, so they know that their investment will be going directly to their inclusive fitness. Fathers and grandfathers might have some paternity uncertainty, so maybe less willing to invest. So is this a fluke? Students usually ask me, well, maybe we're just living longer than we used to. This is not the case. If you look back at historical records, like these women from Oakham, Massachusetts in the 1700s, all of these women are outliving their last offspring by 30 to 40 years and dying at quite old ages. Once individuals make to age 15, once they reach reproductive age, it's highly likely that they will survive to adulthood. So we explain this lengthy period of menopause, one explanation that you should be aware of is called the grandmother hypothesis. And the grandmother hypothesis states that menopause evolved because women can increase fitness more indirectly than directly by helping out their daughters reproduce. Older women may have a lot of acquired skills, culturally learned skills, that allow them to produce a lot of calories, have a lot of knowledge about living their environment, and even though so in the end, perhaps old age is not just a byproduct of living longer than we used to, but it might actually be an adaptation where the skills acquired over a lifetime can be redirected to benefit kin. So let's summarize. You should be aware that it is adaptive to maximize your inclusive fitness across the life cycle. So thinking about humans over the course of their whole lifespan and how you could maximize inclusive fitness over the course of a lifespan. How to understand the balancing of the timing of events like age at reproduction, interbirth intervals, age at last reproduction, such as the evolution of menopause. You should know why human life cycles are unique, the fact that we wean earlier, we're dependent longer, we start later, we get help, and at least among females, we stop reproduction long before the end of the lifespan. And you should understand the grandmother hypothesis, which states that menopause is adaptive to help daughters' reproductive success. Thanks for listening.